Text with a keynote address by Dr. Bibek Debroy. So I request you to join us here very quickly so that we can begin on time. This inaugural session, and before I do that, I would like to quickly let you know My FM 94.3 co-sponsors HDFC, Haryana Forest Department, Hayfield, Vita, Women in Childcare Development, Haryana, gifting partner Chateau War, and Trident, and produced by EYP Creations. Well, all our love to them for their love to us and for their support to us. And we have now arrived at the inaugural session of Literati 2019. You know, whenever we speak of translations, there is always a question on the loyalty and the faithfulness of the translated text. We often think, that essences and meanings get lost in translation. However, today we are going to talk about translating timeless texts, and before I do that, I would like to introduce to you our special guest this morning. We have with us Dr. Sumita Misra. Well, she is an IAS officer of the Haryana cadre, and presently she is working as Joint Secretary in the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, Niti Aayog, New Delhi. And you might be wondering that she is in the IAS, so how come a literary inclination? Well, she has a strong literary inclination, and she's the founder chairperson of the Chandigarh Literary Society and the festival director for Literati. The Chandigarh Litfest since 2013, and we can do with a louder round of applause because it's very early in the morning for us to be drained of energy, right? That's great to hear. And let me also tell you that she's an acclaimed poet and has published 4 books of poems. And her first collection in English was titled A Life of Light, which has a foreword by late Shri Khushwant Singh, the famous author and columnist. So without further ado, let me invite Sumita ma'am to introduce you all to our special guest this morning. Ma'am, I hand over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Shri Debroy, Mrs. Debroy, members of the press, a very warm welcome to all of you, and as always, as chairperson of the Chandigarh Literary Society, it's a personal privilege and honor to be here on behalf of Team Literati, welcoming all of you to the 7th edition of Literati, the Chandigarh International Litfest. A very special welcome to our guest of honor and our keynote speaker today, Shri Bibek Debroy, who is chairperson of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, and I will be introducing him at length later. And also a very special welcome to all our participating authors from all parts of the country, including the Tri-City. Let us not treat Ghar Ki Murgi Dal Barabar. So a very warm welcome to all of you, and I'm sure that we will see very lively and stimulating conversations both on the stage and off it during the next 2 days. Personally, for me, now that I'm in Delhi and I have spent so much time in Chandigarh, being back in Chandigarh actually does feel like ghar wapsi, if I can use that word. And it's a pleasure to be back with some of my great friends in CLS and in Team Literati. As you all know, that Chandigarh Literary Society was started in 2012 by a bunch of us disparate friends, because we thought we could add some value to the landscape and the tenor and the feel of this city. It is city beautiful, but beauty can be skin deep, and we wanted to go a little beyond skin deep. We wanted to touch minds and souls and hearts, and talk about ideas and books and writing. And the philosophy that has powered Literati year after year is firstly, of course, to bring the best of Indian and foreign writing in English to Chandigarh, but also to retain the unique flavor of the 3 Indian languages of this region, which are Hindi, Punjabi and Urdu. And to that end, we, in fact, I think we sort of pioneered the concept of not just poetry in one language, but a trilingual, a sort of Triveni or a Sangam of Hindi, Urdu and Punjabi mushairas, one of which we will be having again this evening, anchored by Madhav Kaushik ji, who's himself a renowned poet. And this concept of these trilingual mushairas has I think, proven to be hugely popular, because every year we have had people staying on, and one year even after the sound was shut down because of some issues, even then the mushaira carried on without the mic till late at night right here on this venue. Another very noteworthy thing that I would like to highlight is that Literati is also probably the first mainstream Litfest in India, which has given space and time to the vast body of prose, poetry, lyric writing, and even movies of Punjabi. And that is, I think, one of our USPs, because this Literati too, I will come to that later, we have some very interesting sessions in Punjabi. But before that, this year's Literati, which like every year is a carefully curated bouquet of prose and poetry, kicks off with a very special session, and a session devoted to what I think is a relatively undervalued part of literature, and that is the art of translation. Translation is especially difficult because a word in one language seldom has an exact equivalent in another language. Further, the translator needs to have an equal felicity in both the languages, the language of the original text as well as the language that he or she is seeking to translate into. And I think the person who most personifies both the vastness and beauty that translation can bring is here with us today. Bibek, Debroy, I especially welcome you. And in today's world, why I think translation is important, and I can vouch for this personally, because I would not have been able to read some of the greatest poetry in other languages were it not for the translator who acts as a medium. And here I'd like to share a quote which resonates with me. Without translation, I would be limited to the borders of my own country. The translator is my most important ally. He introduces me to the world. And therefore, I think today's session, our inaugural session, is going to be one that is going to be rich in reconnecting many of us who don't know Sanskrit with our own heritage and culture and our own writing and our own intellectual discourse from the past. I mentioned two very special Punjabi sessions, and I'd just like to share a couple of highlights. We have one session which is on the revival of the legendary Punjabi movie Chand Pardesi, which will feature Raj Babbar, Manmohan Singh, Subhash Sehgal, J.S. Cheema, Chitraj Singh. And in fact, yesterday I was told that this group who had worked on the movie so many years back actually sat down together for the first time and watched the movie together, and it was a beautiful journey down memory lane for all of them. And the second session in Punjabi, which I would like to highlight, is we have a session tomorrow on 550 years of the divinity of Sri Guru Nanak Dev, with focus on heritage tales from the Punjab. So I do hope that many of you will make it a point to attend these sessions. A few more highlights, with the disclaimer that the authors and sessions that I'm not mentioning here are in no way less. I think each session would be worth attending. But just a few highlights. We have the noted English poet Sri Sudeep Sen later with us today, talking about the elusive art of poetry. And also on day one, we have Sri Sonam Wangchuk, whom, as we all know, is the inspiration behind the super hit movie Three Idiots. And I hope a lot of young people will particularly tune in to come and listen to him. Tomorrow we have another very popular author, Ravinder Singh, in the morning, and then we have Sunanda Mehta talking about the mysterious life and death of Sunanda Pushkar. This evening there is also a Sham-e-Mehfil here, which, as I mentioned, Madhavji will be curating with poets and shires. So do stay for an evening of poetry. This year we also have two, in fact, sir, as you might have noticed, we were just seeing a lot of school children leaving. So this year, every morning we have a workshop here, especially for young authors or budding authors. This morning the workshop was conducted by Chetna Keer and Sudhiti Jindal on the very difficult art of humor writing. And tomorrow we have Abid Surti, the multi-talented painter, illustrator, playwright, and screenwriter, again working with young children. We have also have simultaneously a live photography and art competition going on. And like every year, one of the aims of CLS was to promote new writing. And like every year, we also have book launches scheduled as part of Literati. I would like to mention the authors. Today we have book launches by Lipi Parida, she's right here with us, Praveen Kaushik and Dr. Dalveer Pannu. And on day 2 we have book launches by Sanjay and Priya Tandon and Supreet Dhiman. So my best wishes to the authors who will be having their books launched here. As I've said that, I've always said in fact that CLS and Literati have always been a labor of love. It is a non-government, non-profit with all the attendant challenges that follow. But we have had, I would like to thank all our sponsors who have been a great support, especially Chandigarh administration. The tireless efforts of our young and enthusiastic team of EYP, who are our event creators on the ground, is commendable. They always bring a lot of energy and enthusiasm. And of course, I don't think I can thank my own team Literati enough, both old as in people who've been there from the start, not old in age, both the old faces and the new faces. And the whole team has been, and I'm saying this especially now because I'm not here, and so the whole team has been very well coordinated and commanded by Vivek. And so I would like a big round of applause for the people who have slogged to bring this event to you. And of course, I think the biggest commendation goes to you, the public, the people of Chandigarh, who have given us a response from day one, year one, given us the encouragement and enthusiasm to persist, and embraced Literati as their own celebration of art, literature and culture. Thank you very much. I hope we have a lovely 2 days. Thank you.
Mr. Vivek Atre and Ms. Saguna Jain to come up on stage. And we have the edition of Literati Digest ready to be launched this morning. So to do the honors, I would like to request our guests to quickly come up. Tempting to open and read inside, I'm sure. It's available at the stalls right behind us. So
my pleasure to introduce Shri Bibek Debroy. Shri Bibek Debroy, who is the keynote speaker for the inaugural, was born in Shillong. He later on studied in Ramakrishna Mission School, Narendrapur, followed by Presidency College, Kolkata, where he topped the university in economics. He then joined the Delhi School of Economics, where again he stood first in the university in his masters. Subsequently, he went to the University of Cambridge Trinity College on scholarship. Shri Debroy has a long and distinguished stint in public policy making, both in the Government of India and the non-government sectors, such as the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, the Rajiv Gandhi Institute for Contemporary Studies, Center for Policy Research, etc. He has made significant contributions to game theory, economic theory, poverty, law reform, and rail reforms. He was awarded the Padam Shri, the fourth highest civilian honor in the country, in 2015, and currently he is the chairman of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister since it was constituted in 2017. However, today Shri Debroy is not with us as an economist, but as a scholar of Indology and an unparalleled translator of our ancient Sanskrit texts into English. He has translated the unabridged version of the Mahabharata, the great Indian epic, which was published in a series of 10 volumes amounting to almost 2.25 million words. He has also translated the Bhagavad Gita, the Harivams and the Ramayana in 3 volumes, all of which have been published to great popular and critical acclaim. He has also translated the Bhagavad Puran in 3 volumes and recently the Markandeya Puran in 1 volume. He is also the author of Sarma and Her Children, a book for young adults which combines his interest in Hinduism with his love for dogs. For all this and more, he has featured in the 2019 Limca Book of Records as the most prolific translator. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my proud privilege to present to you Shri Bibek Debroy, and today he will be sharing his thoughts on the subject of translating timeless texts. Sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank Dr. Misra and the Chandigarh Literary Society for inviting me and my wife to this event. We've been to Chandigarh before, but obviously this is our first invitation to this particular event. Let me also formally acknowledge the presence of Mr. and Mrs. Pachnanda, whom several of you know, who are our hosts. We are staying with them during our visit in Chandigarh. Dr. Misra has already told you that she has instructed me, commanded me to talk on translating timeless texts. Very tantalizing title. What I will do in the 30 minutes that I have available is to divide the talk into 3 segments. In the first segment, I will talk about the kind of texts we are talking about, or the kind of texts I am talking about. In the second part, I will explain a little bit about the texts that I am translating, and Dr. Misra in the introduction mentioned some of those. And in the third and last segment of that 30-minute talk, I will specifically focus on one of the latest translations that has come out, namely the Markandeya Puran. So that's roughly the structure. And after that initial talk of about 30 minutes, we'll have some time for a discussion. This is a literary event. A literary event is about books. In the modern sense, books in some fashion began with Gutenberg and the Bible. So let's ask a question. Since the beginning of printing, starting with Gutenberg, how many books have been published in any language in the world since then? Difficult to estimate, but we do have some kind of figure, courtesy the United Nations. Courtesy the United Nations, we know that if we count publications of books in all languages of the world, the number of books published in all languages in the world since the beginning of printing, the modern era, is about 140 million. So roughly 140 million books have been published. Well, 140 million plus 5, because 5 are to be launched today. There is a mission that some of you may not be aware of. It's called the National Manuscript Mission, NMAMI. A manuscript is defined as something that is written down, often in the form of parchment, later paper, and is at least 75 years old. It's pre-modern in some sense. What is NMAMI's task? NMAMI's task is to list how many manuscripts, as I've just defined them, exist in India. Just list, mind you. List not only the manuscripts that are in public collections, list also the manuscripts that are in private collections. All of that listing is necessary before you can even begin to digitize. So far, Namami has listed about 3.5 million. Namami's estimate mind you, is that in the country there are 40 million manuscripts. 40 million manuscripts. Remember, in our tradition, irrespective of language, a lot of knowledge was transmitted orally, verbally. And we are not even talking about that knowledge that may be lost even as I speak. Knowledge that was transmitted verbally, orally. We are talking about knowledge that was written down, rendered in the form of writing. So we have 40 million. 140 million books, 40 million manuscripts. What's interesting about these manuscripts is 95% of them have never been translated. So 95% of these manuscripts have not been translated. So we don't even know what is in them. Many of these texts are in Sanskrit, several are in Pali. Some of you may know that Sanskrit, although as a verbal language is pretty old, rendering it into writing is of recent vintage. And when it was rendered into writing, use of Devanagari is of much later vintage. It was written down in different scripts. Devanagari may be one, but it was written down in Marathi, it was written down in Bengali, it was written down in the Tamil script. And today, there are scripts in Kashmir which we do not even have people accomplished enough to read those scripts. One example of that being the Sharda script. Recently, 6 scholars from India were sent abroad to learn Sharda. So there is this wealth of knowledge, this corpus, and as I said, we don't even know what is in that because it's not been translated. I have in my possession a 13th century text, known as Chaurya Shastra. If I were to translate it and publish it in the form of a book, it would be a book of 400 pages. Chaurya Shastram, as a few of you may have guessed, is a manual for thieves. Recently in the newspapers you may have noticed a report. Kautilya's Arthashastra, the manuscript, is in bad shape. It's getting destroyed. Today, as an economist, if I ask someone, give me some idea about governance, political economy in ancient India, invariably the person will say Kautilya's Arthashastra. Some of you may know that Kautilya's Arthashastra had vanished. There were references to it, but no one had that manuscript until in the year 1905, Shama Sastri discovered that manuscript and translated it. So there is a huge work of translation for this entire corpus that is to be done, and we cannot expect Cambridge and Heidelberg and Oxford to come along and do that translation for us. If we depend on Cambridge, Heidelberg and Oxford to do that translation for us, we will perpetually complain they got this wrong, they got that wrong. So that criticism is legitimate, but that criticism is essentially negative until we actually begin to do our own translations. Let me now turn to the particular text that I am interested in. The particular text that I am interested in, and whenever I am using the word text, do realize that when these texts were rendered into writing, that was the final form of the text. Prior to those texts being rendered into writing, it was oral transmission. There were embellishments, there were additions. The particular text that I am interested in is what is known as Itihas and Purana. Itihas, as some of you may know, is an expression that is used for the two epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The story goes that after Veda Vyasa, many of us have heard of Veda Vyasa as a composer of the Mahabharata. Veda Vyasa is actually a title. Veda Vyasa is a title that is conferred on anyone who collates and classifies the Vedas. And this particular Veda Vyasa was 28 in a line of 27 other Veda Vyasas. So this particular Veda Vyasa's actual name was Krishna Dvaipayan. Krishna because he was dark in complexion, and Dvaipayan because he was born in Ireland, because Deepa is an island. So the story goes that after composing the Mahabharata in 100,000 shlokas, Veda Vyasa composed 18 major Puranas known as Mahapuranas. To give you some idea of the magnitude we are talking about, as Dr. Misra mentioned, 100,000 shlokas of the Mahabharata, the English language translation I have done becomes 2.5 million words. The 18 Mahapuranas together amount to 400,000 shlokas, 4 times the size of the Mahabharata. So the 18 Mahapuranas together will amount to something like 12 million words. What are the Puranas? A Purana is supposed to have 5 characteristics. The first characteristic that a Purana has is it describes the original creation and the final universal destruction. So this is the first characteristic that every Purana is supposed to have. The second characteristic a Purana has is within that major cycle of original creation and final destruction, there are secondary cycles of creation and destruction. So it describes that. Third, it describes the genealogy of the gods, as in the Devas and the Rishis or the sages. Contrary to the impression we sometimes have, Devas are also created, Devas also are destroyed. So it describes the creation and genealogy of the gods and the Rishis, the Devas and the Rishis. Fourth, it describes the genealogies and the dynasties of the 2 major dynasties that existed in India, the solar dynasty Surya Vansha, which is what is described partially in the Ramayana, and Chandra Vansha, or the lunar dynasty, which is described in the Mahabharata. And the last description of that last characteristic of any Purana is that it describes the different eras. What is Hinduism? What are the texts of Hinduism? typically he will say the Bhagavad Gita, he will say the Upanishads. But ask yourself the following question. Who composed the Upanishads? The Bhagavad Gita is slightly different. Who composed the Upanishads? Who composed the Brahmanas? Who composed the Aranyakas? These were composed by people who had retired to the forest, were in Vanaprastha, or were in sannyas. They were interested in moksha, or liberation or emancipation. Moksha, liberation or emancipation is only for a very few amongst us. What did the vast majority of the population do then? The vast majority of the population then as today were householders. Householders were interested in earning a living, making money, hopefully through legitimate means, and practicing the dharma of householders. If we want to understand what householders did or what householders were supposed to do, we will not find that answer in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Upanishads. We will find it in Itihas and Purana. Itihas and the Puranas, they are encyclopedias. They are encyclopedias of information and knowledge, although we sometimes do not realize it. When you go to a temple and you look at the construction of that temple, the construction of that temple is based on the instructions that are laid down in the Matsya Purana. When you have Shraddha ceremonies, funeral ceremonies, those funeral ceremonies are what is laid down in the Garuda Purana. When you are interested in astrology, the basic principles of astrology and astronomy are laid down in the Agni Purana. When the Vaishnavas practice their variety of religion or their variety of dharma, it builds on the Bhagavad Gita but is laid down in the Bhagavad Purana. Unfortunately, because we have reduced our perception of the Puranas to what we read in Amar Chitra Katha, to what we watch on Epic TV, because we have reduced the Puranas to 2-minute instant coffee, we miss out on this treasure trove of information. When I translated the Mahabharata, several people said, "Why are you translating the Mahabharata? Hasn't it been translated so many times?" And when I'm using the word translation, I mean translation into English, not the so-called vernacular languages. Contrary to what you might think, there are only 3 unabridged translations of the Mahabharata in English. Everything else that you see is an abridged translation. Whenever you abridge, you simplify. Whenever you abridge, you focus on incidents. So and so came, shot so and so disrobed so and so. The wealth of knowledge on geography, history, governance, dharma, economic practice, what householders did, all of that is missed. The Ramayana in Sanskrit, there are 3 different versions of the Ramayana. The Valmiki Ramayana is one, there are 2 others also. The Valmiki Ramayana has been translated 5 times in unabridged form in English. I said there are 18 Mahapuranas. The most popular one arguably is the Bhagavad Purana. In unabridged form, the Bhagavad Puran has been translated only 5 times. The Markandeya Puran, which I have translated, has been translated in unabridged form only 3 times. Something like the Matsya Puran that I mentioned has not been translated ever in unabridged form in English. That is the reason I am translating these particular texts, Itihas and Purana, earliest date of composition around 500 BC, final form around 500 BC. In the last segment, let me now focus on the Markandeya Purana. Many of these Puranas presume a knowledge of the Mahabharata, particularly the Kurukshetra war. There is this tremendous battle happening in the course of the Kurukshetra war. The most ferocious battle, the most ferocious fighting in the Kurukshetra war took place when Dronacharya was the commander of the Kaurava army. Drona Parva. In Drona Parva, there is this enormous fight that goes on between Arjuna on one side and King Bhagadatta on the other side. King Bhagadatta was already fairly old. He was the king of Pragjyotishpur, which today is roughly where Assam is. Of course, Pragjyotishpur was much more than what is the narrow geographical boundary of Assam. It doesn't matter. Bhagadatta came to fight on a huge, gigantic elephant known as Supratik. Arjuna shot an arrow at Bhagadatta. At that time, there was a bird flying through the air. I'm not sure if the right word for a bird is pregnant, but the bird, let's say, was pregnant. The arrow pierced the bird. The bird fell down. As soon as the bird fell down, it laid 4 eggs. In the hustle and bustle of the war, these eggs should have been destroyed. But there is always destiny. This gigantic elephant Supratik had a huge bell that hung around its neck. Arjuna shot another arrow and that arrow severed the bell. So the bell fell down and covered the eggs. Inside, the birdlings hatched, fed on their dead mother's flesh, and survived that entire battle of Kurukshetra. They heard Bhishma's discourse to Yudhishthira while Bhishma was lying down on his bed of arrows. The discourse in the course of the Shanti Parva and the Anushasana Parva. And the birds became immensely wise. After the war was over, another sage uncovered, he heard the birds chirping, got his disciples to uncover the bell and discovered these birds. The birds were immensely wise, so they went off to perform austerities on the slopes of Mount Vindhya. There was a famous sage named Jaimini. Jaimini goes to the sage Markandeya and says, please instruct me. Please impart knowledge to me. Markandeya says, who am I to impart knowledge to you? You go to these 4 birds. So Jaimini goes to those 4 birds, and that is why the Markandeya Purana is known as the Markandeya Purana, because this is how the Rishi Markandeya begins to recite the stories, beginning with the birds. a large part of the Markandeya Purana, 10% actually, not really a large part, is stories about the goddess. It's called Devi Mahatmya, 700 shlokas. In the northern parts, it is often recited as Durga Saptashati. In the eastern parts, it is often recited as Chandi. Those of whom who are familiar with the eastern parts will know about the Durga Puja celebrations. The entire liturgy, all the mantras of the Durga Puja celebration are based on these particular sections of the Markandeya Purana. These days, a lot of young children are very fond of watching things on YouTube. So on YouTube we will discover something known as Madalasa's song, sung almost like an opera. Who was Madalasa? Madalasa, to keep the story short, was a princess of the Nagas who married a king named Ritadhwaja. Ritadhwaja was a king. He had a son. He named the son Vikranta, which means brave. Someone whose stride is brave. When Madalasa heard the name, she smiled. The child was lying down on her lap, crying, weeping, and the mother begins to console him. This is Madalasa's famous song. As a result of that song, as a result of that wisdom that was in the song, the wisdom essentially said, who are you? You are not this physical body. Search for what is inside you, etc., etc. Child grows up. Instead of becoming a king and succeeding his father, goes off to the forest. A second son is born. And again the father gives him a similar name. Again, Madalasa smiles. And the same kind of thing happens 3 times. 4th time, the king has had enough. He tells Madalasa, what is this? Why do you smile when I give my sons names that befit a Kshatriya? And all that happens is they just go off to the forest. I need a son who will inherit my kingdom and rule. Alright, you don't like the names I give my sons, you give your son a name. So Madalasa names the son Alarka. Alarka grammatically means nothing. If you are trying to derive a meaning, it means mad dog. Father says, what kind of name is this? Madalasa said, don't worry. Don't worry, I will make sure this son does rule. So Alarka becomes the king. Madalasa instructs him about kingship, and he gives him a ring saying, whenever you are sick and tired of ruling, take out that ring. I've written something behind that ring for you. Much later, after the king has died, Madalasa has died, Alarka grows up, he gets tired of the world, takes out that ring and finds Madalasa has told her son to go to the sage Dattatreya and learn yoga. So there is an extensive section about yoga. So those of you who are young, when you hear Madalasa's song, please do realize it does not necessarily have to be set to Western classical music. It is very, very Indian in nature. Last things, and then I will stop. I already told you these things are treasure houses of knowledge. And I will give you 2 examples. These are the 17 most important kinds of cases that must be tried by the court, civil cases in order of priority. You might think this is the new order passed by the Punjab and Haryana High Court. This is what Bhishma tells Yudhishthira. And guess what was number one in that list? Thousands of years ago, this wonderful, wonderful legacy, this treasure house of knowledge, this treasury that is full of wisdom, knowledge, etc. As I said, 95% has not been translated. And that is what translating timeless texts is all about. And what I think all of us must collectively do is to ensure that this knowledge is not irretrievably lost. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. This is one of the instances where, despite looking at the watch as an organizer, I wish that your talk could go on and on, because I thought you were just warming up to the wealth of knowledge and anecdotes and instances that your research and your scholarship has brought forward to us. So we'll have a very short Q&A. Any questions, just raise your hand and a mic will come to you. We have another mic in the audience.
Even now. One way of answering it, the Mahabharata itself took about 6 years. Another way of answering it is one of these volumes. These are multiple volumes, whether it is the Mahabharata or the Puranas. On an average, it has about 200,000 words. One volume. So to do one volume takes me about 6 months. On an average, because there are work pressures, it means on an average, if you are doing 1500 words a day, on an average, then you are fine.
So that is a very mind-boggling numbers. Any more?
An English Vyasa, and I wanted to ask you whether the English language is good enough to translate all the wisdom of ancient India.
As Dr. Misra said in the introduction, translating anything is difficult. It's particularly more difficult if you are translating from one language to another and the nature of these languages are completely different. Translating Sanskrit into Bengali or Tamil or Marathi would have been difficult, but not as difficult as translating into English. There are some words which actually defy translation. So if you've read any of my translations, often I do not translate some words, except the first time I try to explain it in a footnote. After that I don't translate it. Examples are words like dharma. Examples are words like karma. There is also a problem with the nature of the language. And let me state something that's not very obvious to many people. In Sanskrit, and therefore in many Indian languages, the noun or the proper name is not important. What's important is the verb. For example, I have a word for a tree, and that word is padapa. Padapa in Sanskrit means tree. But padapa does not simply mean ajagar. Many people will say ajagar is a python or a boa constrictor. Absolutely correct. But ajagar is anything that devours a goat. So if a crocodile devours a goat, that's also ajagar. If a human being is capable of devouring a goat, the human being is also ajagar. This is one of the reasons why you will find that Indians will typically not say, unless they become really, really Western, they will not say, I am Bibek. they will typically say, I am known by the name of Vivek, or my name is Vivek, because the verb becomes more important. And therefore, anyone in India naturally is less prone to getting into ego and aham as compared to the West. Having said that, Sanskrit is a very rich language. If you ask me for a Sanskrit word for friend, I will have to think, because I can think of 20 words for friend. So when you are translating, and all of them, they have slightly different nuances. So when I'm translating, I will first have to get the meaning, which is okay, but then I'll have to figure out the nuance. Now let me give you an example of that, because perhaps I'm not able to explain. There is a famous shloka in the Bhagavad Gita. Vasansi jirnani yatha vihaya navani grinnati nara parani tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani sangyati navani dehi. I'm not going to translate that. Everyone has heard it any number of times, especially when someone has just died. After that, Nainang chindanti shastrani, nainang dahati pavaka, naichainang kledayanti apana shosheti maruta. Nainang chindanti shastrani cannot be severed with a weapon. Nainang dahati pavaka, it meaning the Atman, cannot be burnt with fire. Nacha kledayanti apa, it cannot be made wet with water. Nacha shoshete marutah, the wind cannot write. You take any translation of the Bhagavad Gita, with slight permutations and combinations, it will translate exactly what I have told you. But why these astra, shastra in those times were made out of what? Metals. Where did metals come from? Earth. What have I got next? Fire. I've got water and I've got air. In other words, of the Panchabhut, the 5 elements, these are the 4 elements. Space, of course, is anywhere, everywhere. Now, how do I convey it in a translation? Are you understanding what I'm trying to say? It's very, very difficult. Also, the structure of Sanskrit is not the structure of English. So therefore, my translations, I can write better English. The reason they seem sometimes convoluted is the idea is that if someone sits down with the original text, there will be almost a word for word match. So the simple answer to your question is, and by the way, one more thing, that if you're translating someone repeatedly, and let's not get into issues of whether these were composed by Veda Vyasa or not, the style is similar. So I see something written by Veda Vyasa, which is what the Itihasa Puranas are. I know his style. I know what he means when he uses a certain word. So it sort of improves. Having said that, translations are a bad substitute. So I hope people actually do read them in the Sanskrit.
Thank you so much. Thank you.